Stephen Jones spoke at the owners' meeting on Sunday. We'll break down the biggest comments next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on X at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on X at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we are breaking down all of the comments that Stephen Jones made at the owners' meeting on Sunday. And Landon, he said a lot. He also said very little that was important, but there were a couple things that he talked about that I thought we should discuss today. And the first, and honestly, probably the most important, is he talked about Dak and where he is at currently in the recovery process. And he says Dak has been doing great. We actually saw some videos this weekend, Landon, of Dak throwing the ball, but it seems like he's progressing well through the phases of his injury. And the expectation is he should be full go by the time we get to training camp.
Yeah, it sounds like that he didn't want to Steven didn't want to come out and guarantee that he wouldn't be limited at OTA. So it sounds like there may be some kind of snap count going on in the OTAs and mini camps, which is fine. But it sounds like as far as training camp and that sort of thing, he should be good to go, which is right on expectation. It sounds like they're thrilled with his recovery. I'm not shocked. I mean, we've seen Dak kind of come through these. And work really hard to get back in time. So not shocked about the timing of it. Thrilled that it is playing out that way.
Yeah, 2020 came back, 2021 he came back from the major foot injury, played really, really well in 2020. It seems like whenever he has one of these injuries, he usually comes back and plays pretty well. One of the things I did want to just mention is we saw a video of him throwing, and he looked about as thin as I've ever seen him, at least in the offseason. I think he's done a good job as he's gotten older, slimming down, becoming more flexible. And honestly, I think that's something that a lot of these quarterbacks do as they get into their 30s. Tom Brady, it was famous for. We saw even Drew Brees got a little bit skinnier as he got older. It seems like he is trending in the right direction in that way.
Yeah, and it seems counterintuitive, right? It seems like, as you get older, you'd want to, especially a quarterback, you'd want to like build more body armor to kind of, protect yourself. But the truth of the matter is that it's better to be a little bit lighter, on your feet, to be able to move around to the pocket, negotiate around to the pocket. I just think it also doesn't weigh on you as much and isn't as heavy. I just think that a lot of these guys that thin out, they kind of like, what they do in the offseason is they lose a bunch of weight and then they try to rebuild up with lean muscle. So I think that's likely what you're seeing here. And maybe there's an opportunity with him kind of thinning out a little bit to be a little bit quicker, right? And to get a little bit quicker first step than you've seen the last couple of years with the extra weight that the extra body armor he's had on there. So it'll be interesting to see if this is just a result of him, having the injury and not having as much time to work out, or if this is a concerted effort on his part to try to lose some weight in order to kind of, build back on some lean muscle before the season.
Now, he also talked about the backup quarterback situation, how they have a couple, I'm trying to think of the way he phrased it. Like they have a couple trade offers, it sounds like, that are out there that just haven't been accepted yet, but they haven't pulled them off the table. And one of the spots is clear that they want to upgrade it. And he actually talked about how they got to bring in somebody for Will Grier to compete with. Maybe it's via draft pick, but I'm always coming to the conclusion that I would be shocked if it isn't via trade at this point.
Yeah, the quote that he said was, of course, we've missed a few guys along the way, too, in terms of missing out just because the number being a lot higher than we thought it would be on a couple guys. But overall, real pleased with what we were able to do with our roster and help our team. It does sound like when asked about the backup quarterback position, they still had a couple of plans in play. You mentioned trade, that he also mentioned the free agent market, obviously. And I think as
Aaron Rodgers?
What'd you say, Aaron Rodgers? Hey, listen, maybe if we could pry him away from the excited hands of the Pittsburgh Steelers,
The only way to get
maybe
the boogeyman to stop haunting us is you just have to go out and sign him, right?
sign him and then bury him deep in the backyard somewhere.
I don't know. I watched
Um,
a lot of the Halloween movies, and that didn't work either. So I don't.
no, nothing seems to work. He just kind of sits right back up, and then it comes after you again. Yeah, I think he basically was just. When asked the question, he basically gave as broad an answer as possible. Yeah, there's guys in free agency. We could trade for a guy. There's lots of options for us. I think at this point, they're probably waiting to see how the draft plays out.
Bingo. I was going to mention that exact point. Yep.
And to see if they get any great options that kind of just fall to them at some of their picks that the value is nice and they can't pass up. And if it doesn't, then there's obviously options on the other side, the same options that are likely going to be there from now up until the draft will be there on the other side of it as well. And then maybe even some trade options, maybe even more trade options as you are in the draft than you normally would, or maybe trade options that come up because of other teams and who they are drafting, right? Like maybe it becomes some of the running quarterbacks become obsolete. New York currently has 3 quarterbacks, and none of them. It's the classic. You have 3 quarterbacks, which means you're quarterbacks sort of situation. So there are teams like that have loaded up on and kind of hoarding quarterbacks, just to make sure that they come out of the draft on the other side of the draft with something. And so those teams are likely to draft a quarterback at some point, and then that will make one of their backups kind of obsolete. And then maybe you scoop up those guys.
Yeah, and I'm looking at situations like, what if the Saints draft a quarterback in round 1, and it's let's say it's Shedeur Sanders. They have Derek Carr under contract. Is someone like Spencer Rattler available for you to trade? Could you give him like a 5th round pick, 6th round pick for Rattler? Obviously, we think the Titans are going to draft Cam Ward at number 1. Is Will Levis somebody that you could get for a 6th or a 7th round pick via trade? I think that's possible as well. I know the big name floating out there is Joe Milton, and there have been some Cowboys sources that have said the Cowboys are interested in that. I think the initial report was, Landon, that the Patriots are asking for a 3rd, which you drafted him in the 6th last year. He played 1 game against backups in Buffalo, and now all of a sudden he's worth a 3rd. It seems a little rich to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's another guy the Cowboys are floating a 5th or 6th round pick out there for. And if we're just waiting to see if the Patriots will accept it.
Yeah, lots of options on the table. And I think that's really the main message that Steven was saying, is that they're not worried about it yet. They still have lots of time, lots of options. The avenues for filling this spot haven't closed. I think the guys that were going to get signed to the teams that were going to pay them big money to either be borderline starters and backups, those teams were always going to pay those guys that much money. So the folks that are available on the free agent market have been available for a while. Obviously,
they're going to
be available on the other side of the draft. So really what you're waiting to see is, does the draft provide more opportunities, either in the form of a draft pick or in the form of a draft pick to another team that opens up a slot because you let go of an unneeded quarterback, those sort of situations. I think they're waiting to see what happens in the draft. Nothing happens. None of these guys shake out to them. They just turn around and just pull someone from free agency and then go for it.
The last thing before we move on, I'm more curious about the type of quarterback they bring in, not necessarily the name, because I don't think the name is going to be all that exciting, whether it's Malik Willis or Will Levis. Like it's going to be a retread, right? But is it like an athletic guy that brings a lot with his legs that can be used in certain packages, or is it your more traditional drop back passer like an Aiden O'Connell with the Raiders? I think that decision will tell us kind of what maybe Brian Schottenheimer and what the rest of the offense is looking for, maybe after the Dak Prescott era.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is Will Grier is still here, and I know that doesn't mean anything. It's almost like having Tommy DeVito in the quarterback room. Maybe a little bit better. I don't know. I think the reason I bring that up though is that I wonder if Grier, if you actually have plans to potentially hold on to him into the season, I wonder if Grier doesn't provide a soft floor if you wanted to kind of go reach for a more athletic-y, upside-y kind of, maybe a like Trey Lance equivalent, right? Maybe not Trey Lance, but then again, maybe Trey Lance. Trey Lance is still available. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily want to go down that and make him suddenly a quarterback too. But if you wanted to go the route of trying to get another athletic upside guy to develop, and that may even mean a draft pick, maybe not.
Maybe that's maybe Jalen Milroe if I was to you in the third
Exactly.
round.
Right? Like a Milroe type or Milroe himself, right? If for some reason he were to fall and the Cowboys were be able to get a great choice on him or a great value on him in one of their picks, maybe they pull the trigger there and enjoy the fact that they've got Greer there, so that if the development doesn't happen and you need to put him in the game maybe before Milroe's ready because something happens to Dak mid-game or something. I think you could probably feel okay about Greer on a short-term basis, just to get you through a game. So there's lots of ways that they can do this. And I think you brought up a good point. The type of quarterback that they get is going to be a very interesting thing to kind of pay attention.
It's more important than the actual quarterback they get.
That's
so
right.
Just keep that in mind. Let's talk about maybe some new deals for players like Jake Ferguson and Daron Bland. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to even who's cutting down the nets at the end of the tournament. Now, listen, we've got all number one seeds in the Final Four. So there's not really any big upsets or big underdogs here, but I kind of like Auburn a little bit to pull this thing off. And FanDuel makes it easy. Yeah, there you go. Landon's excited to make it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something fun and exciting to bet on. And the FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. When Stephen Jones was asked about some potential deals that could get done outside of Micah Parsons, he also didn't mention Tyler Smith, which I thought was interesting. But he did talk about the possibility of the Cowboys signing Daron Bland and Jake Ferguson early. Any insight there?
Yeah, I mean, just to point out, like the questionnaire specifically asked about Ferguson and Bland, which I think is why the answer kind of got answered that way specifically. But I mean, I think it was just sort of a more generic kind of answer. I'm sorry, from Stephen Jones, in the sense that, yeah, sure, our doors are open, and if anybody wants to come in and start having conversations, we're more than willing to listen to them. Those are two really good players, and we really like our players. And I'm sure everyone could recite from memory the boilerplate Stephen Jones recitation of how he feels about his players. But I do think that it's an interesting conversation to at least have for both of those two players specifically, right? Because Bland, obviously, we've talked about before. Had the incredible season 2 years ago, dealt with some injuries last year, came back and played some pretty good football. The question becomes, like, what do you pay a guy like Daron Bland, who broke the pick six record 2 years ago, is basically a borderline, CB1 for your team?
Let me give you some contracts really quickly, because
please.
Top five highest paid corners in the league by year, right, is Derek Stingley at $30 million, J.C. Horn at $25 million, Jalen Ramsey at 24, Patrick Surtain at 24, and then Jair Alexander at 21. Now, he's an all-pro, but for some reason, I don't get the sense that he's probably in that range. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, right? I mean, the pick six thing it's not fluky, but it's also like 1 year of just absolutely insane production, obviously.
That's the only year he's had touchdowns. He didn't have touchdowns in the first or third years of his career.
But at the same time, he also has been ball productive.
Correct.
Throughout his career. It's not like that was a fluke in the sense that he doesn't normally get his hands on the football. He's been doing that since college. So,
right.
I kind of look at that Jair Alexander number. I mean, honestly,
21.
What's Trayvon's deal?
Trayvon is 19.4.
I mean, maybe a slight bump up on that just for inflation, right? Like, I think that the tariffs probably hit the cornerback market as well. So I think I do think that it's one of those things where you're right that I don't feel like you should be breaking the bank necessarily.
He's not.
With this
He
player.
probably shouldn't and won't get top 5 money. But outside, I mean, after those guys, it's hard to say that he doesn't deserve the same money that like Tyson Campbell, L'Jarius Sneed, Marshawn Lattimore, those guys are getting at this stage of their careers.
One more thing that I think is worth mentioning with his situation that's different than, frankly, all those other guys that you mentioned, right, is that he's a 5th round pick, right? He's he's coming from a spot where he didn't make any money coming into the league and hasn't been making any money so far this at this point. So any contract that he signs, he's actually in a rare situation for the Cowboys where if the Cowboys re-sign his deal, he actually is going to cost more against their cap than what he currently is. Like
which is why
lower
I don't think it's a bad idea. Yeah, that's why I don't think it's a bad idea to sign him now, because you could actually inflate this year's cap number, because they're not going to do anything in free agency or the draft the rest of the way to eat that cap. So you could actually front load his deal a little bit and push some money into the back. But I have my doubts they'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, because honestly, like we said, the reason these names even came up is because the reporter mentioned these names, not because he volunteered these names. And then the Jake Ferguson situation, obviously, if Jake had come into the last year like we had hoped and kind of had his breakout year like we had thought, I think this is a no-brainer. I think we'd already be talking about the Ferguson deal and them having conversations about it. But because, it was such a disappointing season, there's no way around it. He was disappointing last year.
Yeah, 494 yards, 0 touchdowns.
And injury played into that, but not all of it. If you watch his tape, he just didn't look like the same player. He looked. No. I feel like he gained all that weight and it slowed him down. It just to a point where it passed a critical threshold where he just wasn't the same yak player that we've seen in previous seasons. So all this is to say, you have a guy that came in, Schoonmaker, who showed you a little bit when he was, in last year, coming in with a full off season this year. I think this is a real make or break season for Fergie, right? His contracts year obviously usually are, but there's also a lot of competition on the roster. I mean, who knows if the Cowboys end up drafting another tight end? So it'll be interesting to see. Fergie is definitely, of these two, Fergie is the guy that I would definitely advise the Cowboys to kind of wait and see. Let's see how this plays out a little bit.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, in his 3 years in the NFL, 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns. Those aren't great numbers, especially when you consider that you drafted a tight end in round 2 during the 2023 class. So maybe there's a chance that Schoonmaker has a bigger role this year and Ferguson's hanging around 500 yards again this year. You don't want to pay big money to a part-time tight end or just a good but not great tight end. However, on the flip side of this, Landon, you look at the tight end market. Travis Kelce is the highest paid tight end in the league at $17 million. Hawkinson's next at 16.5. George Kittle's at 15. He's obviously not getting that money. And then you look at the tight ends below that: Mark Andrews, David Njoku. He's Dallas Goedert. He's not getting that money either. I think he falls more in the like Dawson Knox, Tyler Higbee, Mike Gesicki range of tight ends in terms of like where he's being valued. Mm-hmm. And you're looking at like $8 million a year, right? Which again is not a lot of money. So if Ferguson wants to accept like a 3 or 4 year deal that's paying him, let's say $9 million to inflate it a little more, it's not the worst deal in the world to just get a good tight end locked up for the next 3, 4, or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that kind of money, especially for re-signing him. Where I do have an issue is I don't want that to be like the reason why you don't come in here and get more competition at the tight end position.
Are you settling for good and not great?
That's what my concern is, right? Is that I mean, listen, I was as big a fan of Fergie, in 2022 as anybody. 2023 and 2024 was really kind of was eye-opening in a lot of ways, right? So my concern has always been like he's never was like an elite athlete,
no,
right?
He's a 4.8 tight end at sub 250,
but he always made it work, right? My concern is that when he put on that extra weight, it dropped him kind of outside of or below that threshold of athleticism.
Yeah.
So if he can't put more weight on him, and he's got to play at 245, right? And he's a 4'8" athlete. Like, that really kind of puts a limit on exactly how elite he can be as a tight end. So if you sign him to that kind of contract that you mentioned, that's great. I think that's appropriate, but I don't know that should prevent you from going out and maybe trying to upgrade the position.
And I think with the way the Cowboys have their contract structured, with so much money going into the money 5 positions with Dak, CD, Micah, who we'll talk about in a second, and then maybe a corner that we just talked about, Daron Bland, who's going to be one of the highest paid in the league. Maybe you just have to make the overall philosophy of your team building being like, hey, we're just not going to pay guys in that middle tier of range. Like, we're going to draft, develop, and let those guys walk. And even if we feel like Ferguson's not a bad value at $10 million a year and we want him on our football team, we're going to continue to try to churn those positions to find greatness.
Well, you've seen it in their free agent market strategy too, right? They're spending money on not middle tier and certainly not upper tier guys, though they'll sign their own. They're spending money on high quality, bottom of the roster players, and then trying to fill the middle class of their roster with draft picks, right? So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's not the worst strategy, but you got to hit, and we'll see if that actually happens.
We also got an update on Micah Parsons from Stephen Jones. We'll dive into that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, later, we got an update on Micah Parsons from Stephen Jones. His exact quote was, we've had visits with Micah, Jerry and I have. We feel good about that. Micah likes to visit, so that's a good thing. The reason why this is important is because we've heard from several sources over the last week or so that the Cowboys and Micah Parsons have not had any visits, and contract stuff has not been discussed. So to hear Stephen Jones say, yes, we've met with Micah is noteworthy.
Yeah, let's try to pull the curtain back a little bit here, right? Because I think it is a little confusing to folks that are following this and maybe aren't reading the tea leaves here. But to me, I'm just going to lay out what my hypothesis on what I think is happening. Okay. I think what's going on is that Jerry, Stephen, and Micah are having conversations about Micah's contract. I don't know if the agent has always been involved in these negotiations. I think the agent probably feels a certain way about that situation and is leveraging their media contacts to kind of, I guess, delegitimize the process or to imply that it's not really a process without the agent. So I think that's why we're hearing a lot of conflicting stuff, is because we're hearing the Cowboys media proxies, talking one way, and then the agents media proxies speaking another way. But ultimately, I think based on what Steven said, which is confirming that they have been meeting with Micah, and what we've heard from Micah's relatives and from Micah directly and from other folks, is that it does sound like the Cowboys have made a couple different offers that have been acceptable-ish to the Parsons camp. They're still kind of hammering out all the details. Obviously, otherwise this deal would be done. But it doesn't sound like there's any, acrimony or any kind of, roadblocks with this deal, which it feels like, there's definitely been some implication that, it's not getting done. It's not getting done. That doesn't sound like it's the case at all. It sounds like all parties, except for maybe the agent, are involved and are having conversations about his contract. So, yeah, it's always fascinating whenever it's these big contract time to see the kind of lines inside of the Cowboys beat world, to see where, who's giving what information to whom, right?
You can generally tell. It's not hard.
It's not hard to tell. No, if you once you recognize what you're seeing, what you're witnessing, it's not hard to tell who's getting what information from whom, right? So I think at this point, I would generally say that the Cowboys are on track to probably get this deal done with Micah Parsons. I mean, obviously, no one's got an update on when, but the fact is that the Cowboys have clearly had conversations, at least ownership, with Micah, and that seems to be ongoing. There may be a little bit of a butthurt agent situation also happening.
From the agent side of things, I don't think there's any rush to get a deal done between now and September 1st or whatever week 1. I mean, Dak signed was the morning of week 1 last year. There's just no rush here, right? Like TJ Watt is another edge rusher who needs a new deal. He's actually going into the final year of his contract as well. You just want all of the numbers to be out there, right? And Micah's value, we know how this works, goes up every single day that goes by because that's just how it works for superstar players. It doesn't necessarily benefit Micah to sign a deal right now. I mean, it does. He's getting $40 million a year. It's probably going to get a super fat signing bonus. So it does benefit him. Let me be clear. He's not going to lose money between now and September 1st. So I think that's where maybe some of the rub is going on here. I think ultimately, I'm not sure if some of the proper channels are being followed or the proper procedures, let's say. But I've got no doubt that a deal is going to get done. I don't want to say soon, but it's going to get done probably sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think that's really the kind of larger message is that this isn't being delayed to make people upset or any. No one's really. Everything seems on track, and there's been kind of an implication that this is taking too long or there's been delays. That certainly has been the case with a majority of Cowboys situations. I'm not denying that. But several. I think this, I think for this situation specifically, look, I mean, as much as we want to believe, as a general public may want to believe that the only reason that these deals get delayed is because of the Joneses' ineptitude, the truth of the matter is like you just laid out, there are advantages. The advantage is to wait for the players. In fact, I was just going to ask you, why do you think Micah wants to get this done early? Like, I mean, that's the question that I still can't figure out, honestly.
I think he wants to get it done early so it can just be done and nobody's talking about it anymore. And that way he's talked about how it's his turn to be a leader or his time to be a leader.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he's going to get advice from his agent. Hey, if you don't have a deal in place, you're not allowed to go to OTAs. You're not going to mini camp. You're not going to training camp. And I think trying to get it done now would help block out some of that other nonsense that just doesn't need to happen.
Well, I guess that's the other part of this that's interesting. And I do think that I'm glad you brought up the OTAs minicamp thing because I do think that that's a rub here, right? Because it does feel like that's like something that gets brought up in the conversation or at least mentioned in the conversation here is that Micah traditionally has not shown up for OTAs and he showed up for the mini camps that are required, right? But for the voluntary stuff, like he hasn't traditionally shown up. So I wonder if part of what the Joneses want and maybe even Micah wants this year is for him to be at OTAs this year. And this is the 1 year where he actually has to get something done in order to accomplish it. And that's the contract, right?
And there's also, I'm sure they're trying to iron out like workout bonuses and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Again, this does not have anything to do with like Micah's work ethic because we know he's going to be ready for when the season comes, right? Yeah. It's more about, hey, we want you in the building being a leader. So here is $500,000 that will be guaranteed to you if you show up to the voluntary mini camp or voluntary OTA stuff.
I think it's probably I think that even if this wasn't the year that he was getting re-signed or whatever, I think that this is probably the first year where Micah would want to come in
probably
to OTAs. I mean, I think that's what I wanted to kind of separate out is that because of the leadership aspect of it, this is actually the first year that Micah's like, you know what, I need to be at OTAs, not for myself, not to make me a better player necessarily, but to be the leader and to be help the team get better. So it's unfortunate that the contract situation potentially may be the actual thing preventing him this year, as opposed to previous seasons when he just wasn't going to show up. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And I'm interested to see if they get the deal done in time for Micah to show up and kind of prove his leadership front.
Yep.
I think he took a big step last year during the season on the leadership front. It would be another huge step to kind of get all this done and show up at OTAs and show everyone that he's the leader of this team.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Lena on X at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.